What's up, team? This is Ro, your best friend at JMSB. So here I was asked a question for COMM 308, Introduction to Corporate Finance. Question number 2, let's have a look. Here it says, White Owl Inc. just paid a dividend of $3 per share. An investor estimates that dividends will grow at 7% per year for the next 2 years, and then grow at an annual rate of 3% to infinity. Determine the market price of the company's common shares if the required rate of return is 12.32%. So this is a very typical stock valuation question. I would expect a question like this to appear perhaps on a second midterm or on your final exam. And the way that you tackle it is pretty straightforward. It happens to be a 3-step process. The very first step is simply to estimate all the future dividends up until the first dividend that grows at the constant rate. And in order to do that, I would simply recommend to set up a table where you've got 3 columns. One column for time, a second column for dividend, and a third column for the growth rate. And now if we have a look at the problem, we should ask ourselves, what is the most historical or the oldest dividend that is offered? So here it tells us that the dividend that has just been paid is a dividend of $3. So because this is a dividend that has already been paid, you can argue that it's the dividend at time 0. Be careful, sometimes it would say the dividend that is expected to be paid or will be paid. In this case, that dividend would be the dividend at time 1 and not the dividend at time 0. So in our table, for time, at T0, we can argue that the dividend is $3. Now the next thing that I would do is I would fill out the growth rate column. I would essentially place the growth rates in the exact same order as how they are offered in the problem. So here we're told that the dividend is expected to grow at a rate of 7% for 2 years. And so we can write 7% 2 times. It then tells you that the dividend will grow at a constant rate of 3% to infinity. So I'm going to mark down 3%, and we can argue that this is G constant. Try to remember that your table has to always progress until one time period past this constant dividend. So in this example, the constant dividend happens at time 2, and so our table should continue up until time 3. And now that we've done that, the idea is simply to grow the dividends. So you're going to take this $3, grow it in value by 7%. You can do that by multiplying 3 by 1.07, by 1 plus the growth rate, and perhaps you'll get 3.21. And then you want to repeat. You want to grow this dividend again by 7% in order to get the next dividend. And then you're going to take this dividend, grow it by 3%, and get the final dividend. If you're doing things mathematically, you're obviously just taking the old dividend, multiplying it by 1 plus the growth rate in order to calculate the next dividend. On a finance calculator, you can simply add the percentage. So you can press things like 3 plus 7% equals, and the calculator would display the next dividend that would be offered. So we'll have a look on the finance calculator in just a second. For now, I just want to make sure you understand what the objective of step 1 is. It's simply to figure out what are all the future dividends that the stock is going to offer up until the first dividend that has grown at this constant rate. So now that we've completed step 1, the next step is to use the Gordon growth model and to calculate the terminal value of the stock. So essentially what is happening here is that the stock becomes a growing perpetuity, because after time 2, the dividend is growing at the same rate forever. And so the Gordon growth model simply tells us that the value of the stock in a given time period is the dividend in the next time period divided by K, the cost of equity, minus G, the constant growth rate. So if I want the price in a given time period, I need the dividend in the next time period. These subscripts T and T plus 1 are not calculations, instead they're referring to time periods. So if you want the price at time 2, you need the dividend at time 3. And so in this equation, we're simply going to substitute the values for the third dividend, the value for K, the firm's cost of equity, and the constant growth rate, which is 3%, and we're going to value the stock at time 2. So try to understand that you always value the stock in the same time period as where you see this G constant. So since the G constant is happening at time 2, in step 2, we're going to find the stock price at time 2. Further understand that you need the dividend at time 3 in order to calculate the stock price at time 2. You always need the next dividend to calculate the current value. So now that you've understood this, we're really just going to plug these guys in. So the dividend at time 3, the firm's cost of equity is offered, it's 12.32%. So as a decimal, that would be 0.1232, and the growth rate happens to be 3%. And so at the end of this, the answer is simply going to tell you what the stock could be sold for, or what it's going to be worth at time 2. So in this case, you should be getting an answer of 37.95859,442. Now that we've estimated all the future dividends and this terminal stock price, the final step is simply to discount them. We're going to discount all future dividends and the terminal stock price to time 0, and that should be the value of the stock. Evidently, the appropriate discount rate that we're going to be using is the firm's cost of equity, which is 12.32%. Now, when we're performing this step, students often make two different mistakes, which are very popular, and they're usually part of the answers. So if you make any of these two mistakes, the answer you get is going to be one of the responses or the choices, and it's going to be kind of like a trap answer. One thing to remember is that when you're performing step 3, you're never going to value historical dividends. So this dividend at time 0 or any dividend at a negative time period should not be valued in step 3, simply because if you choose to buy the stock today, you're not going to get any dividends that were paid in the past. The only reason they give you this dividend at time 0 is so that you can grow it and estimate the other dividends. But the dividend itself is not going to be received by the investor, and therefore it should not be valued in the third step. A second mistake not to make is not to double count this dividend at time 3. The value of every dividend after time 2 is included in this terminal stock price. So this terminal stock price is the value of every dividend that is going to happen after time 2. So since we're going to be discounting this terminal stock price, we're not also going to be discounting this dividend at time 3. The idea is to ignore any past dividends, to ignore the dividend that was grown at the constant rate, and to only value the dividends in the middle and the terminal stock price. And so if we wanted to do that mathematically, it would be pretty straightforward. We'd be using the equation for the present value of a single cash flow. So the dividend at time 1 is 3.21. The way you present value that is by dividing it by 1 plus k to the power of 1. And then at time 2, not only do you get this dividend of 3.4347, but you are also able to sell the stock for $37 and some change. And so because both these cash flows happen at time 2, this dividend of 3.43 and this terminal stock price, you can add them up, and the idea is to divide it by 1.1232 to the power of 2. So we should raise this to the power of 2. And the reason why we're squaring it is simply because this cash flow happens in the second time period, so we want to discount it for 2 time periods. And now if you add these guys up together, you'll get an answer of $35.67 if you round to the closest cent, and that should essentially be the final answer. So let's have a look as to whether or not that's an option. So in my opinion, it's going to be answer B. So now that we've looked at how to do this mathematically, let's have a look on our finance calculators and see how we tackle the problem using the help of the calculator. So on your finance calculators, I'd simply recommend to begin by estimating the future dividends and saving them inside of the memory buttons. So the first dividend was $3. It grew by 7%. So I'm simply going to press 3 plus 7% equals and save that in 1 by pressing stow followed by 1. And that's simply because that's the dividend at time 1. And now I can continue. I can press plus 7% equals and press stow 2. So that saved that value as the dividend for time 2 inside of number 2. Then we can press plus 3% equals followed by stow 3, since that's the dividend at time 3. So at this point, we've essentially finished step 1. We've estimated all the future dividends and we have saved them in our calculator. The next step is the Gordon growth model, and to essentially use that model to find the terminal stock price, to find the stock price at time 2. The stock price at time 2 is simply the dividend at time 3, which is on the screen, divided by K minus G. So I'm simply going to press divided by, open brackets, 0.1232, which is K, minus G, which is 0.03. I can close the brackets and hit equals. So now I have the answer to step 2, which is my terminal stock price. If I like, I can save this number by pressing stow 4, let's say. And now that we've done that, we're simply going to press the cash flow button. We're going to press second CEC to clear it. For CF0, we're going to put 0. We're not going to put the $3 dividend that happens at time 0, simply because this is a historical dividend. So I'd recommend to press 0 followed by enter, and now we're going to hit the down arrow. For C01, I'm simply going to press recall followed by 1, and then I'm going to press enter. That would be the dividend at time 1. You press the down arrow, you'd want to keep the frequency as 1, so hit the down arrow again. At this moment it's going to say CO2, and you'd want to put the dividend at time 2 plus the terminal stock price. So it's simply going to be recall 2, which was the dividend at time 2, plus recall 4, which was the terminal stock price. I'm going to hit equals, I'm going to hit enter. I can then hit the NPV button, which is the neighbor to CF. It's going to say I. You're going to press 12.32 followed by enter, hit the down arrow, and press compute. And notice that you get an answer of 35.668. So if you round that to the closest cent, it would be 35.67. So the correct response would still be B, like yeah, buddy. So I hope that helps. I hope you guys keep posting your questions. And if these videos are helping you, make sure you tag your friends, anybody that you know that would be taking this class and that this stuff would be helpful for them. Ask them to join the group and post their questions as well. In the meantime, I hope you guys study well and keep well. Row out.